In this segment, we're going to talk about bare metal recovery. Bare metal recovery is one of those features that almost every product today has, but very few do well. Right? It is the type of thing that means the difference between spending literally hours and hours, potentially days, rebuilding a server versus getting it up quickly and efficiently so that you can resume business. So, in a scenario where you have a failure of a machine, typically what you have to do is lay down a copy of the operating system, patches, the backup agent, and begin your restores. With bare metal, the principle behind it is to be able to create a boot CD and then simply boot the system off of that boot CD, and from the backup product, push the data back. Now, in most products, you have to go in a complete serial fashion throughout the entire process and restore all of the volumes of data. Right? With AppAssure, we can use the bare metal process just on the C drive, and then once that's complete, we can go back, reboot the machine back into its original version of Windows and use the live recovery features on the data volumes. So it should only take a short amount of time to get that system back up and running. So the first part of the process in bare metal is actually creating that boot CD image. So we're going to go over to the Tools menu, and we have an item called Boot CDs here. Now you can see that I've already got one boot CD created. I can have many. The process is pretty simple. I can click on Actions, Create Boot CD. Here, I'll tell it where I'd like this ISO created, give it a name. I would also put in the IP address and all of the relevant IP information. I'll choose to add the Ultra VNC server based on the fact that I'll be able to VNC into it and access that console remotely. Give it a password. The last piece of this puzzle is, for specific systems, you have the ability of injecting drivers. So if, for instance, you have a Dell R510 or a 710, it has specific network controller cards and disk controller cards that you're going to need a driver for in order to boot the system. Right? The boot CD itself is based on WinPE, and it's the 3.x, which means it's based on the 64-bit Windows 7 kernel. That kernel comes with its own driver library database, but it doesn't necessarily cover everything, and that's where the ability to inject these drivers becomes important. So you give it all that information, hit Create Boot CD, and in about 5 minutes you'll have your ISO image. That can now be taken to some kind of CD mastering software, burnt to a disk, and stored with the server in case of a failure. Right? You can also inject multiple drivers and create a single boot CD that can cover pretty much anything in your environment. Once the process is complete and you have your image, you can now, from here, I can click on this and I can save the image locally to whatever machine I'm working off of, and be able to literally go in and burn that CD. Now, once I am done with that process, I'm ready to go ahead and boot the system. Here you can see that it's actually started downloading the file. We're going to go ahead and cancel that. Now, what I've done is I've created another virtual machine, and I've mounted the ISO image to it so I can demonstrate the bare metal process. We're going to jump over to that machine. We've booted the system. It's come up to this console, and I can see my networking information, and if I needed to, I can change it. You'll notice here that there is a password. So we're going to put that on the clipboard, and hopefully it actually transfers from one virtual machine to another. I can also do things like injecting specific drivers after the operating system has been restored for what we call a dissimilar hardware restore. We can open the command prompt, and we can use any of the utilities out at the command prompt, things like disk part if I need to go ahead and manage the disk environment and get things set up properly. But at this point, all I'm going to do is go back to the core server, and we're going to go to our SQL box, go to our recovery points, and just like, pretty much anything else here, it all starts with the recovery points. We're going to go ahead and perform a rollback. The protected machine, this would imply that the original is still online. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to use the IP address, so it was 192.168.11.75. And we'll hit load volumes. Takes a moment longer than it normally would because at this point it also has to communicate to the BMR client, validate security, make sure that it knows we're supposed to be there. And here we are. So now we only want to restore the C drive. We're going to make it the destination disk. We need the system reserve partition and the actual volume of the C drive. And then we can begin by hitting rollback. Okay, here it tells us that things are going to be mapped accordingly. And we can hit open monitor window. As you can see, the system reserve partition goes pretty quickly because it's only a couple of megabytes worth of data. The C drive is going to take a little bit longer. Right now it's moving at about 18 megs per second over gigabit Ethernet, which is actually simulated because this is VMware. But it's moving pretty quickly. It says time remaining is going to be about 34 minutes. So at the end of this process, all we have to do is disconnect the actual ISO image because this is a virtual machine. If this were physical, I would simply eject the CD and then reboot the system, and I'm back in business. For the other volumes, I will use the live recovery feature and put those back instantly so that business can be resumed the moment that process begins. That's bare metal recovery.